Morty, give me a beat.
Oh man, okay, alright,
What's up, YouTube world? Welcome to my channel, Ace Relay Entertainment. If you're a fan of magic, please hit the like button and subscribe, support the channel. Hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I do future videos. My new book, David Copperfield's History of Magic, showed up, guys. I'm really excited to dive into this book. But in the meantime, I want to share with you a really interesting story in this book, David Blaine's Mysterious Stranger. Did you guys know that the legendary Houdini died on Halloween night, 1926? 95 years ago. And as a boy, as a teenager, he idolized a magician named Robert Houdin. By the way, I hope you're all having a great weekend. Happy Halloween, guys. I'm going to share this story with you guys. Robert Houdin was born in France, December 7, 1805. His father was a watchmaker, and Robert Houdin was set to become a lawyer when a strange twist of fate intervened and set him on a magical path. As a youth, he had gone to a bookshop to buy a book on clockmaking. When he got home, he discovered that the bookseller had actually given him a similar-looking book called Scientific Amusements, which contained 2 entire volumes of magic. Reading about conjuring gave Robert Houdin the greatest joy ever experienced. He couldn't put the books down. In fact, he stole a town's oil lamp to continue reading well past his bedtime. For over 20 years, Robert Houdin studied magic, supporting himself as a clockmaker and a creator of automations. He finally opened his own theater in Paris, 1845, and began a short 7-year magical career that redefined the state of the art. Robert Houdin's contributions to magic were enormous. He was among the first magicians to replace the ridiculously large cumbersome boxes and stage paraphernalia with a simple, elegant, more natural stage set. He also dressed in evening wear instead of ludicrous Merlin-inspired pointed hats and robes that some conjurers favored. Robert Houdin's theories of magic were that what intrigued me the most. His notion that a magician is an actor who plays the part of someone with supernatural powers was revelatory, and his theories on acting seemed to anticipate the method school. Although one says during the course of a performance is a tissue of falsehoods, the performer must significantly enter into the part he plays. To himself, belief in the reality of his fictitious statements, he wrote, this belief on his own part will infallibly carry to a like conviction to the minds of the spectators. These ideas, along with his immaculate attention to detail, made Robert Houdin's magical effects among the most memorable ever performed. In addition to his many magical innovations, it was the creativity he brought to the standard effects that propelled them to a new level of achievement. Take his famous ethereal suspension. This was a variation on an old suspension that had been done by Indian fakirs. As if by a miracle, the magician would suspend his assistant in midair, supported only by one pole under one arm. Robert Houdin took this one step further. Ether had recently been introduced as an anesthetic, so Robert Houdin claimed that he had discovered a new wonderful and property of ether, that it would, in strong enough concentrations, render the body of a human as light as a feather. To demonstrate this, he brought his young son center stage. 3 stools were placed on a wooden plank that rested on 2 end trestles. His son stood on the center stool and extended his arms, and canes that rested on the outer stools were placed in his armpits. Now Robert Houdin's artistry came into play. A flask that purportedly contained ether was held beneath his son's nose until the boy apparently fell asleep. Thanks to a backstage assistant who was pouring actual ether into hot shovels, the smell of the chemical permeated the theater. The center stool was removed. I'll just show you this pictures here. and it's the Robert Houdin in his later years. The center stool was removed, then one of the canes and his supporting stool were removed, and as if by miracle, Robert Houdin's son was suspended by a single cane. Then, to prove his son's incredible lightness, the magician lifted him to a horizontal position using only his little finger. His son was now sleeping peacefully, lying horizontally with only a single cane supporting his entire body. Robert Houdin's other effects were just as sensational, but his greatest performance took place far from the stage of his small theater in Paris. In the first chapter, I described Robert Houdin's mission to Algeria on behalf of his government, while his duel was provincial marabout, leader was amazing. His earlier performance in a small theater in Algiers warrants scrutiny for both the elegance and the power of his effects. On October 28, 1856, Robert Houdin found himself facing an audience of Arab chieftains, brigades of native soldiers under French command, translators, and other civilian authorities. His job was to convince them of his supernatural power. He was an actor playing the part of a wonder worker. He began by doing nothing. The profound, almost religious silence seemed to petrify the spectators. He then started playing to the Arabs, the part of the audience he had to convert. First, he produced cannonballs from a hat, perhaps a sly metaphor for France's military superiority. Then flowers, then 5 frantic coins, all mysteriously emanating from the simple hat. At this point, Robert Houdin would normally perform his famous inoxidable bottle effect, in which a single bottle would produce enough wine to satisfy the entire audience. This evening he adapted to the customs of the Muslims, who shunned alcohol, and conjured up steaming coffee, which appeared miraculously from a large silver punch bowl. But mere amusement wasn't enough. He had saved for last 3 effects that would startle and even terrify his audience. Robert Houdin brought a small box to center stage. From what you have witnessed, you will contribute a supernatural power to me, and you are right. I will give you a new proof of my marvelous authority by showing that I can deprive the most powerful man of his strength and restore it at my will. He then asked for a volunteer, and a muscular Arab came on stage. Are you strong? He asked the Arab. Oh, yes. Are you sure you will always remain so? Quite sure. You are mistaken, for in an instant I will rob you of your strength, and you shall become as a little child. The magician then asked the Arab to lift the box. The Arab did with ease. Is that all? He said coldly. Wait, Robert Houdin said, then made an imposing magical gesture at the Arab. Behold, you are now weaker than a woman. Now try and lift the box. Unbeknownst to the Arab, the magician had activated a strong electromagnetic under the stage. The box had an iron plate in its base, so the magnetic force made it immovable. The Arab strained to lift the box by its brass handle, to no avail. Then the magician delivered the final blow. Robert Houdin triggered another switch, and the live electric current surged through the handle of the box. The Arab's body went into convulsions, his legs collapsed, and he screamed in agony. The magician mercifully disengaged the current, and the Arab, thoroughly embarrassed, ran out of the theater. Robert Houdin did 2 more standard effects. He caught a bullet that was fired at him with an apple. He made a young Moor volunteer disappear from under a large cloth cone. This last effect unnerved the audience, that there was a general panic and people rushed for the doors, only to be met there by the same young Moor, resurrected by the master wonder worker Robert Houdin. This spectacle was so impressive that a few days later the Arab chiefs met with the magician at the governor's palace. They wore red robes, a sign that they would now pledge loyalty to France, and presented Robert Houdin with a scroll to honor his feats. The conjurer returned triumphantly to his native land, where he wrote 4 remarkable books, including his memoirs, which ranks one of the most influential books on magic. He died of pneumonia in 1871, but his contributions to the art of magic reverberate to this day. Pretty intriguing story. Just one more quick story about Robert Houdin. In the 1850s, in the North African country of Algeria, a group of Muslim miracle men called the marabouts were stirring up a revolt among the native tribes, encouraging them to sever their ties to France. The marabouts accomplished this by doing simple pieces of magic that would whip the local tribesmen into a frenzy, convincing them that they possessed supernatural powers. To preserve and order their colony, the French government didn't send troops to Algeria. They sent a retired magician named Robert Houdin. Robert Houdin traveled around Algeria performing miracles. He produced cannonballs from a hat and money from his fingertips. He made young natives disappear, but he faced his most difficult challenge when he visited a small tribe in the desert. A marabout Sheikhis, who had heard of his previous feats, pulled 2 guns from his robes and challenged him to a duel. Since Robert Houdin claimed to be invincible, the marabout would have the right to the first shot. Thinking on his feet, the French magician postponed the duel until 8 o'clock the next morning, claiming that he needed 6 hours of prayer to refresh his powers. He didn't pray. He spent 2 hours preparing for his challenge and then fell asleep. The next morning he met the marabout and his entourage in the village square. The street was swarming with Algerians who hoped to see their Frenchmen killed. The marabout produced the guns and loaded them with powder. Then he offered Robert Houdin a choice of bullets. The magician chose 2 bullets and, under the watchful eye of his adversary, loaded the guns. The Frenchman walked 15 paces from the sheik and turned to face him without displaying the slightest emotion. The marabout took careful aim and pulled the trigger. The pistol fired and Robert Houdin smiled. He caught the bullet between his teeth. Robert Houdin then lifted his gun and, instead of pointing it at the frightened marabout, fired the pistol at one of the buildings on the square. Whitewash flew, and where the bullet had struck, a large patch of blood suddenly appeared and dripped down the masonry. The marabout rushed to the wall, dipped his finger in the red substance, and tasted it. The spectator in the square raised their eyes to the heavens and began muttering prayers, convinced that the French sorcerer had powers far beyond their own. The Algerians lost faith in the marabouts, and the uprising began to cease. Wow. Very intriguing story, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please smash the like button, and have a great day.